Morshed with the Morshed Group at Sothebys, where we specialize in representing entrepreneurs and founders in their residential real estate needs. Welcome to the Entrepreneurial Home Podcast, where we interview Austin's most successful men and women and discuss their business journeys as well as the entrepreneurial home that really empowers them to thrive, both in business and in life. During COVID, we are changing our video podcast format to deliver everything to you via Zoom with the intention of still delivering on amazing values, idea shares, as well as supporting our fellow business owners and entrepreneurs in a very challenging time.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Entrepreneurial Home Podcast here in Austin, Texas. Today we've got a really, in my opinion, a real special guest on our show here, especially for the Austin entrepreneurial community. Someone who I consider an absolute pioneer and a passionate person around really building what entrepreneurism in Austin is all about, right? It's about growth, helping each other, all ships rise with the tide, and really working with each other's ideas. And this is a man, I think, that really epitomizes all that and so much more. So Kevin Koym of the Tech Ranch. And before I let him wax poetic about himself, I'm going to throw a few things out there for our listeners. And I think a lot of our listeners are already going to know your name anyway. But guys, here's the man who designed the first e-commerce platform for Dell in Austin, which is pretty cool, fun fact. Started really the first entrepreneurial community like support group back in '97, the first co-work space in Austin, and then the first privately funded accelerator and incubator in Austin. So those are some pretty incredible accomplishments just to begin with. So I think that this is going to be pretty awesome just for Kevin to be able to share a lot of his wisdom. 7-time startup veteran. Over 6,500 entrepreneurs have benefited from Tech Ranch's vision, as well as Kevin's, over 42 countries. So man, I could just go on and on. And so I don't steal any more of your thunder, Kevin. Just man, welcome. I really appreciate
Thank you very much.
Time. Yeah.
Tarek, I appreciate you reaching out and happy to be here, especially for Austin entrepreneurs. I'm obviously extremely passionate about Austin entrepreneurs and actually, what we have. I've lived in 9 different cities through my career, including Silicon Valley, Boston, Chicago, Guadalajara, Mexico, Bay Area, Silicon Valley and Santiago de Chile. And mega long story short, I kept on coming back to Austin because we have something really special here. So yeah, when I got the invite for being on the podcast, really excited about it because, even though I might be traveling around the world working with entrepreneurs, Austin is home, and it's my privilege to be here with you. Thank you.
Absolutely. So man, let's dive in. Given the mad props I threw your way, man.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
That's right. You actually blushed, by the way. I actually saw you blushing a little bit. So let's dive in. Let's talk about your entrepreneurial journey. Tell us about that. Where to get started? Why entrepreneurism? What does it look like today? Give us the whole caboodle.
It's interesting. So I went to UT. Actually, I grew up in San Antonio. Went to UT at Austin. Got an engineering degree. While I was going through, I was really lucky that I got a bunch of different engineering jobs. But then I worked for a Steve Jobs startup called Next. Fell in love with startups, fell in love with that beating fist on table. We're going to change the world together with technology. And I was a, green straight out of college engineer that I look back and I was so fortunate to have that kind of opportunity happen about, just randomly. And I didn't even really know what startups were at the time. I didn't know what startups were, didn't know what entrepreneurship was. I didn't come from a family that had, X number of entrepreneurs in the past or anything like that. Grew up a poor kid in San Antonio, Texas, single mom, right? And then when that happened, it was really profound in that I got to see, Next had a really intense history, but the thing that it ended up preparing me for was straight out of that, I started a startup all the way back to '94. That is the company that ended up building the e-commerce engine behind Dell.
And how old were you then, by the way?
You know, when I started, I think I was 24.
Wow.
24,
Okay.
so,
Pretty young.
pretty young, you know, and didn't know what I didn't know, which is the best part about starting a company then. You know, like the most valuable asset at, you know, at that point in my history was I didn't know what I didn't know. And actually my first customer for my first startup was a bank in Mexico. So I say my first dollars earned were pesos in Mexico, which is one of the reasons that it was really natural as we switched over to doing all this international work. I had a really advanced piece of database technology here in Austin, right? And this is partially why I think the world is so important to think about for entrepreneurs that have emerging technology. Is, you know, I couldn't get any of the local financial institutions in Texas or banks or things like that to give us the time of the day. But this is one bank in Mexico that desperately needed the solution that we had. And I took a risk. It was intense to have my first customer for my first startup outside of the country.
Wow.
You know, because I'd never done it before.
Right.
And, you know, foolish ignorance was probably an asset, because it kicked my ass, if you don't mind me saying it that way. It kicked my ass, but it also set me on the path that I'm on now. From there, I started several different other startups, as you mentioned. I'm usually the kind of guy that would get the company off the ground to the first $500,000 for the revenue, or first $1 million. Out of 6 of those companies got to the first $500,000 of revenue before I handed it off. On 2 of those, I got to the first $1 million of the revenue before getting someone else involved. In my career, I've always been the type of person that could see, here's the vision, here's the technology, you know, kind of like the pioneer, focused on impact around the world. I mean, how is it that we can actually do, you know, always looking at what's the bleeding edge of technology, whether it's on a lab bench or coming out of some other institution, and how can we actually apply it to where it's needed the most. That's the pattern that you see over and over and over. And then where that took me to was in 2003, when Austin started having this little blip, like, hey, wait, this is a real place you can start a startup. When I started my first startup here in Austin in '94, what a pain in the butt. And and so I ended up, you know, leaving town a bunch of times to have the right opportunities to build out, you know, to build out my entrepreneurial career. But in 2003, it was obvious that something was happening. And that's when I opened up Austin's first co-working space, because at the time, if you were an entrepreneur and you didn't want to work in your living room, you pretty much had to sign a 3-year lease. And then secondly, it was just more of to kind of create a focal effort of where you could actually have a lot of different activities happening. Started the incubator venture accelerator part of the business around 2005-ish time frame, and then from there, you know, started on. I decided to divest out of the co-working space in 2017, which is really fortuitous to what's happening today, right? When I divested out of that, there were 58 places in Austin that had co-working spaces.
Right.
Types of, and so being the first when there was a need to innovate made a lot of sense, right? When there's 58, the value of having the innovator around isn't as high. And I wanted to make sure that we kept kind of the focus around, you know, how can we help entrepreneurs that are really driving the state of the art, especially around what we call impact innovation, you know, solving the world's problems, you know, through technology and startups. And that's really when we returned to the roots of doing a lot more things international. I can tell you 1,000 things about it, but that's kind of a little bit of the Austin history and a little bit of my background about why I did what I did at the time.
Nice. And so I guess like take us into a segue then of how did this all lead to Tech Ranch? Obviously you touched on it in terms of the incubator side, right? So give us you know, when did that really get going? What does that look like today? You know, what's happening there?
Yeah.
And
So,
what differentiates you guys? Because even within the accelerator or incubator space, there's now, you know, several choices, if you will, right? But all doing something different. So what?
Yeah, I know there's a lot of different things that are happening in Austin's entrepreneurial space, and it's really good, right? You know, for a guy who worked in Silicon Valley twice in his career, you know, we still do not have the same number of features that you would find in the space here in Austin as you do out in Silicon Valley. That's why there's still a very unique set of things you can only do out there. But what was important to me as I looked at the you know, what did Austin need? I actually had a really terrible personal tragedy that happened in 2003. I lost a friend. She took her own life. And part of the thing that I actually was looking at is, okay, how do I take this, you know, technology founder, startup guy, career background? You know, my face has been on the cover of Computer World magazine in the 90s. Yay, great. You know, that doesn't really matter when you actually come up against this type of crisis of how the hell is it I live in a world where this woman would actually choose the path that she did. And so part of what happened in this whole process was it had me step back and say, all right, I don't know how to go solve all the world's problems, but I do know how to start an incubator that helps a bunch of entrepreneurs, which I've always worked with entrepreneurs. Like you mentioned in the intro, I started my first Austin-based entrepreneurial group in 1997. I do know how to help entrepreneurs, and I'm another entrepreneur that will help these entrepreneurs, you know, really build companies. And through that, we can change the world for the better. Mm. Now, in 2003, Tech Ranch wasn't called Tech Ranch. It wasn't named Tech Ranch until the end of 2008, when a guy by the name of Jonas Lamas, brilliant former business partner that really loved to death, he actually named Tech Ranch Tech Ranch. That's when things took off to the next level. And the key thing that happened is it's always been about, well, we didn't have these words back then, but it's always been about what I call impact innovation. We'll work with almost any entrepreneur. And I say almost any, in that really the heart of where we want to target is entrepreneurs that are taking technology that solves some human need. One of the reasons I keep a map of the world behind us is, you know, as you mentioned, we've worked with entrepreneurs from 42 countries, but the idea is, I'm naive enough to believe that we can solve all the world's problems, not by doing charity, but by introducing entrepreneurs to markets. And one of my best examples of that is we have a group of entrepreneurs based out of Adelaide, Australia, that we introduced through our network into Ethiopia, you know, right over here, right?
Wow.
To solve this one disease called leishmaniasis, and not for charity. There's nothing wrong with charity. I say this a lot of times, and people are like, Kevin, you sound anti-charity. I'm not anti-charity, but if you really want to solve a problem, and you can build a business model to solve that problem, you can take it to scale in a way that you can't do with normal, you know, charitable type of things. And so the idea was, this disease is, you know, it's one of the top 3 that the UN has been taking on, I guess, prior to this year.
Yeah.
And this one doctor who's a good friend of mine who started a group called the Pandemic Tech Accelerator said, hey, Kevin, we got to solve this problem. We took a group of entrepreneurs that had this capability in Adelaide and connected them to Ethiopia. All right, this is the key thing about what Tech Ranch does. We think that we can solve, but our entrepreneurs can solve local problems with global insight. And sometimes these collaborations happen, you know, where it's like a group here, a group here. The best part about Austin, okay, you might ask, why does Austin tie into this? As the name South by Southwest implies, right? One of the reasons Austin became Austin in such a big way is because of the South by Southwest conference. South by Southwest was always interesting because there's this crossroads of where people were intersecting here in Austin, Texas, that you wouldn't see. Why is it not out in the Bay Area, right? Why wasn't the biggest interactive conference out in the Bay Area? It makes sense that it might be out in the Bay Area because there's so much activity there. Now, Austin's special sauce has been, we've always collaborated together. It's part of our core culture.
Big time.
And secondly, because of the collaborative spirit that comes from the musician hippie past of Austin, because of that, the ability to put people together to collaborate is just massive.
Indeed.
Yeah, and that's the sort of thing. Most people actually think that competition built the United States, and it's not that. It's collaboration. Even Milton Friedman, if you know the libertarian economist, they got the Nobel Prize in economics years ago. His big focus in one of the interviews I listened to was, it's not about competition. Competition's not what's making it possible. It's these collaborations. Because you have more people in the world that are more connected, there's more collaboration. Certainly there is more competition, but you can create more value by stacking it in many different ways. That's what I'm giving you, the conceptual side of your question about what is Tech Ranch, but the most important thing is, how we can connect people across the world. Initially in Austin, Texas, when it was still difficult to start a startup here, and before we had density, like in Silicon Valley, I actually saw, this is a real story, in the 90s, I saw one guy spill beer on another guy at a place called Gordon Biersch in Palo Alto, and a business got started. We didn't have that here in Austin. I remember sitting there and I'm like, okay, how can we actually bring that same thing here? And it's the connective tissue. The connective tissue of Austin, because of our culture, is what's so powerful. Now, what we're attempting to do and, working on right now as Tech Ranch is not put Tech Ranch around the world. We're not opening McDonald's franchises or something like that, but we're creating that connective tissue so that any problem that any of your listeners see, or actually also any of the entrepreneurs that have solutions, we want to know about what you've got going on, because, I am naive enough to believe that we can solve all the world's problems.
Nice.
And the best part about it is I can give examples in almost any category, and I love doing it based on what our entrepreneurs are already doing.
That makes a lot of sense. So I'm going to ask you a question off this. So if I'm an entrepreneur, and let's just say, which I am, but let's say I'm starting a company, right? And let's just say, I'm just going to pick something, right? Maybe it's scalable and it's a service-based product, and it's good for the United States and different cities, right? But it's more of it's maybe a luxury good, right? Maybe that entrepreneur isn't probably the right fit for Tech Ranch versus an entrepreneur who's really solving something that's bigger in terms of some bigger issues, and there's monetization around that. So that's kind of like, would you say that's fair?
That distinction definitely fits. Let me say something about that, and then I'm going to actually extrapolate it out a little bit. That distinction definitely fits, just from the standpoint of, in my heart of hearts, about the whole reason, the crisis that created, why did Kevin, start Tech Ranch, or start the original business that became the group of businesses that are named Tech Ranch, and then this whole kind of maniacal approach to driving so hard across the world. That first type of entrepreneur you mentioned, or the one that actually has the solution, that's who I really want to cater to, whether he or she is in Austin, Texas, or, as an example, earlier today, I was interacting with a couple of our entrepreneurs who are also doctors in Nigeria. In both cases, the person that has the solution for the world, there's something interesting. But the year is, now let me talk to the luxury entrepreneur as well. The year is 2020. This year has been hell on everybody. There's not anybody that hasn't had this year be hell. 56% of America is supposedly having long-term negative effects psychologically from what's happening with the virus. And so the thing that we might actually know about is, even in that luxury brand, that luxury product, if there's not an impact story, you're not going to have the same level of relevance. As we thaw out into 2021, I'm sure we're all going to have like some parties. It's going to be great. I'll be doing the same thing. We'll certainly be celebrating that I get to get out of the second bedroom. And in my case, I'll certainly go back to the international travel that's been taking around the world over the last, X number of years. But the truth is that now everyone needs to find meaning. in a way that they were not in touch with in 2019.
Very good point.
Yeah, the only thing I'd actually say for some of the other entrepreneurs that I don't mean to discount them. I do want to say that, yeah, we really go out of our way to cater to these entrepreneurs that are taking a fundamental risk. But on the other side, if there is like a part of what I would hope, that some of the entrepreneurs that might be in more of the luxury case, we would love to actually help you actually get in contact with what is that impact story, so that you can actually leverage that. And one of the other things we need to talk about in Austin, Texas is it shouldn't be an either or. There are a handful of people that kind of have Silicon Valley mind thinking, Silicon Valley kind of the limitation that say, well, we're only going to go to this one accelerator or another accelerator or something like that. That's not very Austin, by the way. Yeah. And that you're told one of the reasons that you can get these massive ventures off the ground in the Bay Area is you actually have this whole group. You can actually start here, go here, leverage up. I would just encourage that for us to be thinking about it.
I like that. I like that a lot because it is ultimately, it is a community and collaborative effort, right? So that makes sense.
And we need to stick to our roots of what made Austin, Austin. The thing that made Austin, Austin, I'll preach about it the second time, is collaboration. So we should stick to that. Even as Austin grows, even as Austin becomes more successful, even as we start having unicorn exits, all that sort of stuff, that's great. But let's remember, why did this all of a sudden come out of the blue? Why is it that Austin all of a sudden went from, not listed to not in just the top 20 of most entrepreneurial cities in the world, but the top?
Right.
Why did it happen? It's because of this thing.
Yeah. It's interesting to say that because I always tell people, whether they're moving here, whether just whatever it may be, right? Being in the real estate space, right? I always tell people, in terms of business and entrepreneurism, but just in general, at least in the United States, it is absolutely the most collaborative city I've experienced, period. And it's what always keeps me coming back and keeps me here.
Yeah.
Right. So I think it's really powerful, especially for those looking to grow, whatever that means for them, especially including entrepreneurism. Tell me about what's happened during COVID, for Tech Ranch. What impact has it had or not? And, for our listeners, from a place of, so many entrepreneurs, startups, and even established companies, right, are having to shift or had to shift during COVID, some not. So tell us kind of what impact has COVID-19 had on Tech Ranch? Also, real quick, before you answer that, what are the qualifications for someone who's interested in the Tech Ranch? Like, what are your minimum requirements, right? Because all incubators, accelerators usually have some minimum requirements.
Well, so on the requirements, most of the entrepreneurs that are engaging with us right now for the programs I'm about to say are actually at the startup scale-up level. Mm-hmm. The scale-up level, just because we are helping a number of companies move across country boundaries. Mm-hmm. Now, in my case, the story I told you about myself was when my very first company, I actually had a product that my first customer was in Mexico. I was Austin-based, but my first customer was in Mexico. And so I think really different than more the traditional startup. There are a lot of people that, even though they're startup guys, they're very traditional. I don't know if and so I think about it really.
I get that.
So to qualify for us, we actually have programs that go all the way from, the very get-go of, hey, I'm startup curious, all the way up to, corporate innovation programs that like the example that you gave with Dell earlier about, that ability to build skunkworks. Some of the most interesting stuff we might talk about is stuff I can't talk about because we have startups that we help bridge to, billion-dollar corporations that are solving a specific set of problems that those corporations want to take on, right? And I can give you an example. I do have a bunch of examples I can give publicly about that. It's a different way of looking at it in that we're much more hyper-focused on how we drive entrepreneurship, use entrepreneurship to drive innovation, right?
Makes sense.
And so part of it is a facet of my career. I did not grow up through the ranks of the investors or, the VCs or something like that. I grew up through the ranks of the technology entrepreneurs that became innovators that then, started the incubators. And so I think TechRanch is a reflection of that. That being said, we have, there's one event that we have called the Campfire, and you can read about it at techranch.com/campfire. That is a community event that anyone who watches this is welcome to join. And the key idea about it is building on the success of the Austin community model. Part of what I did was I designed a way to just create interactions that I think are important, because out of those interactions, innovation is a social concept. And if you're not connecting with other people, you won't be able to get there as fast. We all the time have entrepreneurs that internationally that come bring, part of their company to Austin that are trying to figure out how do we get ahead in the market. And we're able to show them hey, let's cut 6 calendar months out of the process just because of the connectivity. So the main thing is, that's one program that's just free. You can actually just sign up, get on our email list, and we'll tell you about it. The things, though, that were really, from a standpoint of the real win being, how can we actually solve these world problems? And I gave the leishmaniasis example earlier. And, for the show notes, I'll provide a link to it. So anyone who wants to see how something really like this can actually happen. We've got a bunch of examples of this, but this is like a win for me. We have a program called the Pioneer Program that, this last year we hosted entrepreneurs from Italy, from Mexico, and from Russia. Actually, we hosted entrepreneurs from many different countries, but we had formal programs that were funded by the federal government of Mexico, the national government in Italy, and in the case with Russia, the Eurasia Foundation. And part of what was happening is, if I'm being serious about what I've said about solving all the world's problems, then we need to be connected around the world.
Sure.
We need to be connected around the world. And so the key idea here is how to build that infrastructure to be able to do that. Last year, we had 3 bridges scheduled and that we delivered on: Mexico, Italy, and Russia. This year, we actually were on plan for 7 of them. Obviously, when March came around and when February came around and the virus started looking like it's hit, some of those governments had to move back and say, hey, we've got to use these funds. We've got to reappropriate these funds to dealing with the virus. One of the worst calls, or not worst calls, because I totally understood it, was with one group that was so excited about working with us, and everything was signed and stuff like that. And I quite literally got a call from one of the ministers from this country saying, hey, Kevin, I know I've made all these commitments. Please forgive me. And I'm like, dude, I totally get it. Go save some people's lives. Nice. Now, out of that, what came is we also, the network got, you're asking me about the revenue question. The revenue went way down. We had three bridges for this one part of our organization planned. And each one of those was a sizable chunk of change. And then we're up, we're going to be at 7 bridges with this idea that the next couple of years, you're going to see some stuff that happens at a whole different global scale, right? And then the virus hits. We took a massive hit against all 7 bridges. Now, part of what happened, though, was a lot of that got redressed in that, especially during the scary part of the end of March, I was getting calls from all around the world, like every continent except for Antarctica, saying, hey, I know that you do this stuff with entrepreneurs, but hey, can you just help us with PPE, protective equipment? So these networks that we had set out, trust networks that we had set out, in the previous few years, we've had bridges with South Korea, with Australia, with several other countries, with Chile, with Mexico in the past. The trust network that we had ended up getting used for these other things. These other, and it was kind of odd. Initially, I was like, wait, I'm not a commodities guy. I don't know anything about masks. I don't know anything about, gloves and all the stuff you use in a hospital and stuff like that. But it was valuable anyway. Now, we made some money from that as well. It wasn't just, it was good to actually have the trust network, and then allowed us to build that sort of stuff out. But what it really taught me was, that the value of having a trust network that's connected around the world, especially in crisis situations like what happened with coronavirus, is priceless.
Yeah, wow, that's powerful.
And even though I was quite upset about losing the revenue that was, that was slated for this year, that things were signed on and stuff like that, really wasn't excited about that at all, because we had to scramble, and there was some gnashing of teeth and stuff like that. That being said, it really taught me that this idea of having trust networks that are tied around the world that could solve these problems in these unique ways. People around the world, not just the United States, have unique insight about how to solve problems. There's a math principle that says, like, if you want to solve a complex problem, the more heterogeneous the solution set you have, the more likely you're going to be able to solve this complex problem.
Interesting.
So as much of a pain in the ass as it was to have all 7 of those bridges deals put on hold, all 7 of them, stepping back from the standpoint of the trajectory of where I think we can go now, it was a great investment. It forced me as well. I was in 22 countries over the 3 years before COVID hit, right? Last country was, in November and December of this last year alone, I was in, Mexico, Israel, Palestine, Russia, Egypt, with a trip to France planned as well. That was just November, December of last year. Oh. But 22 countries in the last 3 years. When you start thinking about what might be possible, it's pretty freaking amazing. I wish we had gotten farther along before the virus hit. But the virus, the great gift in it, that was a pain in the butt, but was a great gift in it, is it validates the premise of, by having all these connections, we can actually make things happen that we couldn't imagine otherwise. Large corporations, large enterprises get to do this, right? IBM wants to move into another country. No big deal, right? Yeah. They got $1 billion sitting there to be able to do it. When we can actually extend this capability to startups and scale-ups and entrepreneurs, right? When we can extend this capability to the most innovative, the most creative group of individuals in business, then something fundamentally happens. And that's the thing that, even though we got kicked in the gut this year, like we all did, but even though we got kicked in the gut, that's the thing I get really passionate about. And let's tie it back to Austin. I don't think if I had actually been in some other part of the world, I would have seen this. I don't think I would have seen it. I don't think I would have seen the crossroads that Austin teaches about, and the kind of the musician hippie background where, we hear about Janis Joplin and stuff like that. That thing, I got infused with that kind of that community spirit just because, coming out of engineering school here in Austin, Texas. So yeah, it all ties together. And it makes me really hopeful for the future. There's still a lot of stuff to clean up with, both economically and just from the virus itself. There is a big uptick happening in entrepreneurship. It's happening around the world. I'm concerned that it hasn't happened as hard in the United States. There's been a lot more people being conservative on across this, at least the reports I've read, is that entrepreneurship was in decline in the United States in 2017, 2018, 2019. I do think that the crisis that was created, the downside of the crisis is, it's the whole Chinese character, crisis means opportunity kind of thing. That's great. I wish it wasn't from people being in such a rough position, right? It really sucks for a lot of people. We have 40 million people who lost their jobs in this country alone. But from a standpoint of me especially, me, I'm a zealot for entrepreneurs, right? It's, come on in, the water is fine. It's a, pain in the ass that this happened this year, but we're going to make it work, and make it work together. And that's the thing. That's the other thing back, tying back to the question about Tech Ranch, if any of the other venture accelerators see this video, they don't know me personally or haven't heard this. Part of what I want to say to the Austin group here is, yes, more than everything ever before, this is Austin's moment for how we collaborate together and take it to the world.
I love it. Nice. I love that. I love that credo. I'm down. I'm in.
Yeah.
Yeah. Kevin, thank you. That was actually really awesome. I loved hearing that. I heard credo. I heard collaboration, which has been such a theme in this conversation. And that is such a key to success here and anywhere in entrepreneurism. So I really appreciate that. We've got kind of just a little bit of time for one last question here. And this is one of my favorites on our podcast, which is, every entrepreneur has their kind of hack and go-to to get into flow and creativity and creation, right? Our mutual friend, right, Kotso, he always talked about flow, right? And what he did around that to really get into flow. And he was working on some amazing stuff. So, in a time where so many of us are having to work from home and in more confined spaces, dealing with maybe family and kids, and it's an interesting time to really be able to get into flow. So what's your hack? What's your tip, whether it's before COVID or since COVID, to really get into flow? And how do you kind of set up your kind of environment for most success?
Well, I miss having an office. I do miss having an office. It was a little bit easier when there's this whole separate of work from home. But
Right.
now, there's some interesting stuff that came out of it. The number one thing is meditation. By far has actually made this process easier for me. I started studying Zen meditation. I'm Christian, but I started studying Zen meditation as an extension of my my martial art practice. I've been a martial artist, for the last 30 years, and I've studied a martial art called Aikido for the last 25. And
Nice.
so, right now, obviously, everything's been shut down where we're not able to, go throw each other, which, by the way, was really therapeutic for me. But the other side of it, too, was the dojo I practice at also has what's called a Zendo, a meditation area. And getting trained in that meditation in 1999 has been really helpful. Now, I used to do this, probably 3 or 4 times a week. For the last 180 days, the thing that has happened is I started meditating daily, about an hour a day. And I had been, always kind of ad hoc meditating, but it's really hard to understand about how it impacts your life until you've done it for some period of time. And I don't mean like one big, day of meditation, but a little bit, even if it's just 5 minutes a day for, 6 weeks in a row. There's even 5 minutes a day, 6 weeks in a row will have a profound impact. And so I, at this point, really hadn't been teaching our entrepreneurs about that sort of stuff. But I think going back into the new realm of what's going to happen with our programs and, some of the things that I personally want to bring to the table for entrepreneurs. You're going to see a bunch of different programs and classes at Tech Ranch. You can read about it at techranch.com. But then there's some stuff that I think that I've gotten to learn on my own personal walk with entrepreneurship, especially over the last 4 years. Meditation is probably the number one hack. Nice. And just, the simplest thing, you can get there's a timer on the iPhone. It's probably on Android as well, called Insight Timer. Download it. It's a free app, and start meditating 5 minutes a day or more. But, I would suggest just 5 minutes a day. I'm not getting to do my martial arts practice. I'm replacing some of that with cycling, just from the standpoint of I personally have to do physical activity that if I deviate my mind from it, there's like a real serious downside, meaning, I might get hurt.
Yeah.
In that I've never been really good. I've never had the discipline to go to a gym and just work out with weights or something like that. For me, It was either on the mat where there's someone swinging at you, or on the bike where you have to stay focused. But by far, out of all that sort of stuff, is meditation.
Nice. I really appreciate you sharing that. It's interesting how many other entrepreneurs have referenced some version of that, right? And I think in this time, especially to our listeners, guys, it is time to really do things like meditation, because it really is a centering in a world of a lot of chaos right now that is so imperative, because in our day-to-day as entrepreneurs, staying centered is so pivotal, even when things are going well.
So. That points to an interesting thing. I don't think a lot of business people face the same issue that entrepreneurs face.
Yep.
And since this is a podcast focused on entrepreneurs, I really want to say that, you know, a lot of times entrepreneurs think I've got to go learn another business concept, or I've got to go get an MBA or something like that.
Right.
One of the funny things I say is, if you want an MBA, go to a hiring site and find an MBA. Don't go get the thing that the entrepreneur needs to know that the business person can ignore is stuff like, how do you center yourself, right? That what you just said, you and I both know it, because there's probably a moment, I don't know this about you, I certainly know this about myself, that there's moments that if I hadn't had this practice, I would have lost it. I lost it anyway, but maybe I didn't lose it as much.
100%.
You know?
I agree, 100%. 100%. Kevin, man, thank you so much. This has been a powerful, I can't believe the time has flown by the way it has.
Yeah, no, I appreciate
incredible insights, incredible shares, this incredible history. I think that everyone can find you guys, techranch.com, if I heard it right, correct?
Techranch.com.
And it sounds like you guys are, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, and if there's anyone that's interested more on the stuff that we're going to do more for, you know, entrepreneur-centric, there's a sign up at kevinkoym.com. The website hasn't been updated with all the updates it's going to have in the next 6 weeks, but some of the more of the internal entrepreneurial kind of stuff is going to happen at kevinkoym.com. We'll announce it through TechRanch, but if anyone wants to get on our radar, techranch.com, and there's a contact form that has, you know, a little bit of information. Would be great to get onto.
I know I'll be on it, so I'm sure that a lot of people will jump on it after they hear this. So I'm excited to see what happens out of that. Hey man, I'm looking forward to us getting together in person and going deeper with some of those conversations that we talked about earlier.
That sounds great. I look forward to it too.
Truly, thank you for being here. And to our listeners, you guys can listen to this podcast as well as the others from the past at the morshedgroup.com, but of course all through our social media handles. And hope you guys stay safe and really commit to collaboration.
Exactly. Yeah. Best of luck to everyone out there. And thank you, Tarek, for today. I really appreciate you setting up this forum.
Absolutely, man. We'll talk soon, Kevin.
Take care.
All right. See ya.